What is the difference between the Noodlers Black inks? Okay, so I have a bunch of them. I do talk about some of the differences. I'll go ahead and shout out right now to myself and my past self several years ago. I shot a video reviewing Noodlers Black, and I compare it to several of the other Noodlers Black inks. But I'll still give you a brief rundown, so you can go check that video out. It's super old and super like not outdated because the information hasn't changed, but you get to see a much heavier version of me back then. Anyway, so Noodlers currently has 11 black inks that we carry at Goulet. There's lots of other ones, Manhattan Black and some other like exclusives that are out there that I don't really know anything about, so I can't get into all those. So I'll give you a brief rundown of all the different Noodlers Blacks and just like a couple of the highlights. First thing before I get all into the properties and whatnot, check out the Noodlers Noodlers properties spreadsheet. It's under the comparison tools on gouletpens.com, right there at the bottom of the list there. It's a PDF spreadsheet thing that Rachel helped put together with Nathan Tardif that has all the properties of all the Noodlers inks. We try to keep it pretty up to date, and it gives you at least the best idea of pretty much any resource that I know that keeps all the Noodlers inks and their properties separate. So some of the properties on these Noodlers Blacks are not that different from each other. A lot of them are very similar. It might just be a different theme or slightly, just like one different property that's slightly different. And so a lot of them are almost kind of interchangeable. So it's really kind of just, whatever strikes your fancy kind of thing. So here we go, starting from the top. And I'm doing these in well, not alphabetical order, somewhat alphabetical order. But anyway, Noodlers Black is the #1 standard. It's sometimes called bulletproof black, but it is by far just the standard. It's the #1 most popular ink that we sell at gouletpens.com. Bam. It's the standard that I use for all of my Nibnook writing samples that we have on Goulet pens. It's a solid all-around black. It's permanent, fraud resistant, bleach resistant, you name it. So it's just great forgery resistant, all around pretty darn well behaved black ink. And the next one I have is Noodlers Borealis Black. A little less permanence. This one is meant to emulate Aurora Black. Aurora, Borealis. It's pretty wet writing ink. So Aurora is known for its wet flow and all this kind of stuff. Nathan basically kind of reverse engineered Aurora Black and created Borealis Black. So if you like Aurora Black and you want an alternative, Borealis. Noodlers Dark Matter. Okay, so this one, I kind of know the least about this of any others. And actually I looked at our product description and it's terrible. We need to update it. But basically, the Manhattan project, when that was done, they used this certain type of ink. And Nathan basically kind of reverse engineered that ink that was used on the Manhattan project and created Dark Matter. And kind of it. So the ink is really more about the theme and the history, kind of that. Not as popular as a lot of the other ones, but that's kind of the cool backstory to it. And it's got a lot of good reviews. It's a very kind of just well-behaved, general, all-around black ink. So it's worth checking out. Noodlers Bernanke Black, don't worry, that was just a normal cough. Noodlers Bernanke Black, it's a fast-drying ink, so it's going to feather a little bit more. The way that it's fast-drying, it's not that the ink itself actually dries fast, it's a very wet-flowing ink that absorbs quickly into the paper. So it's fast-drying like to the touch on the page. A lot of people think like fast-drying ink, oh, it's going to write really dry in my pen and so on. It's actually the opposite of that. It flows super wet out of the pen, and it feathers and bleeds more than normal inks. So it's designed for left-handed people. When you need to write and you smear your writing a lot, you want something that goes down quickly, absorbs into the paper. You're going to sacrifice some of the visual quality of the ink, but it's not going to smear. So that's what it's really designed for. Noodlers Black Eel, identical properties to Noodlers Black with added lubrication. The reason you have the added lubrication for Black Eel is because Nathan designed it so that you can use it in piston filling pens without having to clean and lube up the inside of the pen very often. So a lot of the piston filling pens that are coming out these days, the Twisbys and Noodlers and stuff like that, can be disassembled, so it's a little easier to grease them and stuff as you want. But with certain pens like Mont Blancs and certain Pelicans and stuff like that, you really can't take them apart easily, if at all. So it helps to be able to lubricate them. Even if you're using a cartridge converter pen, if you're using a converter, some of the converters are tough to take apart. So it can help just kind of keep that. That's not quite as big a deal as the piston filling pens, but that's what it's for. It tends to write a little wetter, a little longer dry time, so on, but it's still another permanent black ink. Noodlers Polar Black. identical properties to Black Eel, but with added freeze resistance properties. This one is going to feather a little bit more, absorb a little bit more, sort of like the Bernanke Black will. It's going to be flatter in color. You're not going to get any kind of shading or anything like that. But it's going to be freeze resistant. So sort of like I answered earlier up in Boston, if you got negative 25-degree temperatures, the Polar inks are going to be a good alternative for you. It's really the only ink that I can even tell you that has any type of freeze resistant qualities is the Noodlers Polar inks, and Polar Black is kind of the staple of the Polar inks. Noodlers X Feather, it's a thicker ink, so it's going to be similar to Noodlers Black, but it's slightly thicker. It's meant to be feather resistant. It tends to work pretty well. A lot of people, actually, the number one use that I know from people is like to use it in dip pens or in flex pens. You know, things that are wetter writing and they want to have the flow impeded just a little bit. When you're using a dip pen, you know, a lot of times, unless you have a really good ink reservoir or something on the dip pen, the problem is like dip ink is made to be thicker, so it's kind of hangs on to the dip nib. It doesn't have a feed system like a fountain pen does. So X Feather works as kind of a good hybrid because it's a little bit thicker, so it can be used on those dip nibs and also can be used in a fountain pen. That's where it tends to work well. Noodlers Black Erase. This is kind of a weird ink. It's a whiteboard ink. So you use this in a highlighter or marker pen and it works as a whiteboard. So it's not a dry erase marker though, it's a wet erase marker, hence the name Black Erase, wet erase. So the way that it works is you use it and it doesn't dry out like an alcohol solvent-based whatever you know, dry erase marker, so you don't get that smell. It writes really wet, really dark, and then the way you clean it is you get a wet rag, paper towel or something like that, and you wipe it down. So it cleans up pretty easy. It doesn't work with like a dry eraser though. So it's definitely kind of like a mentality shift thing there, but it's something that Nathan created just as an experiment, and he did one test batch of it and you know, shot one video on it and didn't plan to sell it again. We had so many people ask us about it. This was like 4 years ago too, that we decided to carry it, and I don't know that anybody else even carries it. You know, we buy it by the case. It's not an exclusive to us necessarily, but anybody else who would want to carry it would have to buy it by the case as well. And a case is just a lot of a very kind of weird specific ink like that. So that's how we do it. So we have it. Noodlers L. Lawrence is another one. This is a black, but it's kind of like not quite a black. It's kind of like a dirty motor oil color. So it's after Lawrence of Arabia. It's got a lot of history, a lot of theme to it. It's in the UK series, so this isn't exclusive to us for the time being. Has been for a couple of years. Drew, our customer care manager, it's his favorite ink of all time. Just a nice little fact there. He loves it. It's kind of a cool ink, so it's a nice black but not black kind of alternative. It's got some permanent qualities to it. It's technically an eternal ink, so it's, you know, archival and stuff like that. It's a little higher maintenance, a little higher cleaning, stuff like that, but it is kind of a unique ink. Bad Black Moccasin is the next one. This one is very interesting. So long story short, back in 2004, I think it was, or maybe 2003, Nathan this was before Noodlers was being distributed at all. Nathan was only selling the ink directly. He ran a contest for anybody for $1,000 to be able to remove Noodlers Black off paper. You know, basically try to like fraud remove the ink. And the one person that was able to do it was like a grad student or something at MIT, used some kind of laser to remove the ink off the paper to where you couldn't see that it was ever there. So what did Nathan do? He created the Warden series of ink, which includes Bad Black Moccasin, you know, Bad Green Gator, Bad Blue Heron, Bad Belted Kingfisher. Those 4 inks. Created them to be laser proof. So this laser at MIT cannot remove these inks off the page. Super not practical for just about anyone else, but if you want like the most permanent ink that you can get, Bad Black Moccasin would be one of them. However, in all terms of all practicality, Noodlers Black would pretty much get the job done for you. The Bad, you know, Warden series of inks tend to feather a little bit more, tend to bleed a little more, so a lot of people, they're a little more hassle than it's kind of worth, but hey, it's got a cool story to it, and it's an alternative for you if you truly want the ink to never be removable. And then the last one I have is Noodler's Heart of Darkness, which I guess I should have put that up near somewhere else on the list, but anyway, It's only available in a 4.5 ounce bottle, but it's very, very similar properties to Noodlers Black. It's after the book written by Joseph Conrad by the same name, so it's got some history to it. So I think that's got a lot to do with it as well. It's a permanent black ink. Very similar in properties to Noodlers Black. I can't really tell you much what the difference is, except that both are universally loved for working really well on flex pens, and then also working really well on cheap and absorbent paper, not feathering and having a relatively quick dry time. So I think Heart of Darkness might have the edge a little bit on Noodlers Black in terms of dry time. So that's why it tends to be popular. Whew, there's a rundown on all the 11 Noodlers Black inks.